Hello, today I'm bringing you a panorama from Bhutan. This beautiful country is an extraordinary place. It is the last great Himalayan kingdom shrouded in mystery and magic. It's a kingdom where traditional Buddhist culture carefully embraces global developments. This wonderful and alluring mountain kingdom is situated on the Himalayas' eastern edge and is famously known for its monasteries or fortresses, which are known locally as dzongs. And it also has beautiful dramatic landscapes that range from subtropical plains to steep mountains and valleys. Bhutan is like nowhere else. Pristine landscapes, snow-capped peaks, primeval forests and rivers, colourful festivals and beautiful traditional villages. This is a country where the rice is red and where chilies aren't just seasoning but can be the main ingredient. This deeply Buddhist land proudly prioritises its traditions but is not frozen in time. A beautiful blend of ancient and modern makes this country endlessly fascinating. As a photographer, there is an almost overwhelming array of subject material to point your camera at. You've got markets, farmers, rice fields, mountains, and village life. I love all the subjects that Bhutan offers me, especially the beautiful festivals, but my absolute favourite is the landscape. And one of my favourite spots is right near the large town of Paro and the place where you fly into this lovely country. This is Paro Taktsang, or Tiger's Nest. It's a prominent Himalayan Buddhist sacred site, and the temple complex is located on the cliffside of the upper Paro Valley and dates from the late 17th century. At an altitude of just on 10,000 feet and sitting 3,000 feet from the valley below, it is quite a trek, but the views and the experience are simply magnificent, and you will soon forget your discomfort and tiredness once you reach this wondrous destination. I have co-hosted a couple of photographic workshops into Bhutan with my good friend and buddy Ewan Bell, and I will never forget the time we had carefully arranged to camp in a small monastery 500 feet above this famous tiger's nest so we could be there at first light. We had ascended the day before, and our wonderful team of porters and guides from Bhutan Scenic Tours had arranged the camp down to the last detail. We rose well before dawn, and after a hot breakfast we headed down the track to be in position in front of Tiger's Nest as the first rays of sunlight filled the valley. What a glorious morning that greeted our group. The light was magical and the viewpoint perfect. I shot many images here, but remembered to shoot a sequence that would tell the story in a most delightful and panoramic way. Okay, so we've got 7 files in our folder of Tiger's Nest, and you can see that they've been underexposed. I did this by about 2 stops because it was directly into the sunlight and it was a very hard exposure. So we take those 7 files into Camera Raw, and you'll see the new version of 12.4 gives us, as I've mentioned before, the opportunity to display them both vertically and horizontally. And this is a great idea because we can see them all along on the horizontal. So in any file we can actually just select all and then merge to panorama. Once we're in the panorama mode, we can choose, as always, between spherical and cylindrical. My favourite is usually spherical. And if we pull the boundary warp out to 100%, we can see that we do have enough negative space. And when I click cylindrical, it makes the image too fat. I don't want that at the moment. I can adjust that later on if needs be. So clicking on spherical, I'm happy with that because I do have the negative space at the bottom. We can now merge the file and we save it in the same folder where all our images were kept. We can see here down there as it builds just what an amazing job the panorama section does in the Camera Raw. And while it's building, we can do the final adjustments in Camera Raw before we move it into Photoshop. So we do lots of adjustments to just get it right. I often go into the color mixer and I boost colors that I want already here, like the reds, oranges and the yellow mix. I also bump up the aquas a lot of the time, especially if I've got a blue cast when I'm dealing with direct sunlight, especially backlighting, adjusting the temperature and the tint a little more, and then finally I have a look at the clarity and the texture. We need to be careful with these as it can change the look of the image very, very quickly. So now we've taken it into Photoshop proper. We have a look at it, we see that we've got a lot of things that we need to fix in this image. I got a lot of spectral light, and first of all I'm going to look at the image size, and it's way too big because of the 7 raw files. I want to move that down a little bit to where I normally work from, and you can see here I'm going to change the peripherals to 15 inches in height. That now fattens it a little. I didn't want to do that in Camera Raw. I rather would do it right now once I'm in Photoshop itself. Zooming in, you can see that there's a lot of things that need to be fixed up using the clone tool and the content aware brush tool. A combination of these tools will eradicate most of the problems in your images, particularly when you want to clone things out. The cloning tool is amazing, and you can see here I'm using the brush content aware fill to get rid of a lot of these things, and in a combination with the actual cloning tool I can actually put back things that I want in the image from nearby. This is an acquired skill, and particularly when you've got areas that you want removed completely, it's a combination of working all the tools, working the clone tool, working the content aware tool, working the brush tool, and using those three intelligently and with a little bit of finesse and artistic endeavour, you can actually patch up some really bad areas in your photograph that you don't want there and that you want removed, especially clutter and bad shadows and things like that. So a little bit more artistic license here to just clean up the ground, add a little bit more vegetation, get rid of some of the highlights. And when we see it in the overall photograph, it actually starting to look really, really nice. Now we can do as much or as little of this process as we want, or feel that the photograph is justified in doing that. And I'm very, very keen to get rid of spectral highlights. I don't like flare in my beautiful panoramas, and I will take considerable time using the clone tool to actually eradicate this as much as possible from my image. I find it becomes a real eye magnet if you leave it in to any degree, and it somewhat detracts from the overall look of what you're trying to attain in these beautiful panoramas. So I will actually spend quite considerable time in the overall processing of my files to actually get rid of this material. So it doesn't matter how well you photograph it, and I always leave the worst bits till last. So this tree is causing me some concern. So first of all, I'm going to clone out where I can, and what's left I'm actually going to encircle that with some marching ants, and I'm going to change the colouring just to pop that last little bit off. So I'm getting rid of the reds and the magentas, and to a certain degree the yellows, darkening it off a little bit, and then finally finishing with the brush tool there. And that's looking really how I wanted it. So just a final clean up, looking around some of the spots in the image, and then we're going to save it, because I've got a little trick up my sleeve that you've seen me do before. So I'm going to save it in the same folder. You can see here, there it is. It's right next to the DNG, I'm going to take that into Luminar, and when it opens, I'm going to do some more work with the actual sunlight. So using the sun rays, we use our X and Y sliders, and we bring that right over and place it over our original sun rays that were in our photograph. And then using the other sliders, such as the radius and the glow radius, the amount of warmth, the amount of penetration we want, we can randomize the sun rays to look exactly like we want them or how we imagine them to be when we were taking the photograph. Again, using a little bit of artistic license and putting back in what we saw when we were actually shooting those 6 images for the original panorama. Once we're happy with all our adjustments, we can export that same file, and remembering Luminar uses it as a JPEG with an E, and it sits it right next to our original JPEG that we've been working on in Photoshop. So we now take that new file back into Photoshop for our final adjustments. I want to do a little bit more work with the sun rays. So using my brush tool and selecting the warm colour in the family of colour, a little bit warmer there towards the oranges, that's it. And watching how much opacity I have, keeping it well down in vivid light, I want to put a few sunstrokes, and that's far too strong. So see, we take it down even more. Less is really good. Less is more, in fact. Till we just get those sun rays working exactly how we want them to make this image pop. As I said at the outside, when I was bringing these images into the RAW or camera RAW converter, I had to underexpose dramatically so that I wouldn't blow out all those highlights there with the sun. And so now I'm just replacing that wonderful information back into my panorama to make it really glow. So we darken off some of the areas just to get the light more even. A little bit of a vignette helps too. Gradient tool set to the right toning. You've seen me do this quite a few times in my various presentations to you already that you can watch on my YouTube program. Finally, a little bit of colouring, an overall glow to the image that I want to do, just around the sunlight again. This is basically just doing the final touches. And I'm actually seeing that looks really nice. I just want to lighten it off a little bit more for the actual buildings of Tiger Nest there. And you can see I'm just highlighting the lovely grand old temple itself. Some light coming down into the valley. Again, you can do as much or as little of this as you want. Pump up the vibrance somewhat more, not too much. Change the curves now. Just want to give it a little bit more contrast. There we go. Be very careful with your sliders. You only need to do this a little to actually make it look a lot better. Finally, I put a stroke around it with a clean white, 2 pixels on the inside. And when I go into the black screen, you'll be able to see that it's finished up dramatic, beautiful, and it tells the whole story of Tiger's Nest, the morning light, the pathway down and then across and up to the temple itself. It's a beautiful place in Bhutan, and it's a must-see destination when you visit this glorious, beautiful and superb country. I will certainly be heading back to Bhutan in the near future, no doubt co-hosting another amazing photographic workshop with you and Belle and the wonderful team we use there. For any additional information on a workshop here in the Himalayas or anywhere else we conduct them, head for my website, or alternatively go to Ewan's website. This information can also be found on my YouTube page. This is Ian Rolfe, and I thank you again for watching.